The pros and cons of living in Panama. I'm joined here by a happily married couple. Josh, he's a U.S. citizen, and Ksenia, she's a citizen of Russia. And you both have experience living in Panama, right? Spending time there. So, who wants to start out talking about some of the biggest pros of living in Panama? You want to start out, Josh? Or
she has a lot of good things to say.
All right, let's do it.
Yeah, well, so we overall spent about 6 months in Panama, twice for 3 months each time, and I just really like Panama. In general, I really like Latin America, but I think the climate in Panama especially is one of those climates that I find to be very just good for me, and also the view of the ocean for me when we were in Panama City, for example, was just something that you can't beat, I think, because I just think that it's a very pleasant, very peaceful environment that you can find yourself living in if you're in Panama. And I also think that especially for me, Panama of all places, I don't know if it's the people, sometimes people say that like people in whatever place are great, make you feel at home or something. And I'm not sure if it's the people of Panama or something else, but Panama is just one of those places for me where I really want to go back every time. Like I just left Panama, I already want to go back to Panama. And so I don't really know what exactly makes Panama so special for me, but it's definitely one of those places in Latin America, like that is very high on my list, like top 3. Panama will always be there. And so at this point, when we travel anywhere else, like I really like El Salvador, for example. I really like that, but really like being in El Salvador. But I was telling my friends that, I already have a very solid top 3. So as much as I love El Salvador, those places are taken. And one of those is always going to be reserved for Panama in my heart. So I don't really know how to explain why exactly Panama is just such a nice place for me. It could also have to do with me coming from a very cold climate myself. So maybe it's just a very pleasant just place for me to be. And I also really like this one hill that they have not far from Panama City, which is called Ancon Hill. It has a lot of history. It has poetry, history, and nature all together. And I think that if you're interested in the history of Latin America, there's definitely a place to check out, also a place to learn the history of. And it's a very good place for hiking, free. There is also a small village there that is, I think, will cost you only $3 to enter, but they will also teach you about different villages that you can find around Panama, how the schools in the more rural areas function. So it's just a very, very enlightening experience for someone who, as a foreigner, can't really access some of those rural areas, or even if you can go to rural areas, you probably won't be exposed to the kind of things that local have to go through to get those experiences. And so I think that that's a very nice place to visit, and there are also great views there. There's great nature. You can see sloths right there. So if you compare, for example, Panama and Costa Rica, because we went to Costa Rica, we saw a lot of nature in Costa Rica. It was all great, but you really need to go out there. You need to go to a faraway place, or you need to know the spots inside of the capital to actually find sloths, for example, or find birds. And in Panama, when we were there last time, we were really lucky to see a baby sloth that just came down to very close to the ground when we were there, and it was just amazing to just observe that. And it's just such a proximity to nature and to the kind of animals that we as people who are from much colder places, who are not from South America, don't really get to see. And Panama and Costa Rica as two places just really offer a lot of that, because they're right at the border between the North and South America. And so I think that if you enjoy that, I think that's one of those places that you can really enjoy, but still much more developed in some parts than, for example, Costa Rica. So for me personally, I think that's what made my stay in Panama more enjoyable than my stay in Costa Rica, in terms of just having to go out of your way to find those experiences when it comes to Costa Rica.
Oh, thank you for sharing that. What about you? What was your highlight during your time in Panama? Was it the animals, or did you find anything that was particularly of interest?
Well, I definitely enjoyed the animals. That the day that Ksenia is referencing, when we saw a baby sloth come down, was especially memorable, because sloths are more active at night. It's a survival thing, and so like this baby sloth, not knowing exactly what it should be doing, ideally for its survival, it came down, and we got to watch it, right from the road. It was, I don't know, a couple yards in front of us, and yeah, that was really cool. But my impression of Panama is a little bit different. I think it's probably a really nice place for a lot of people to go to if you're not very accustomed to getting out of your comfort zone in terms of, a lot of the places in Latin America, because it has a lot of American influence from the US. And, you can see that in like the restaurants that you have available, in the conveniences that you have available. I'm referencing mainly, what is available in Panama City. That's where we spent all of our time, basically. And, there's a lot there, that people who don't even like necessarily speak Spanish would still have access to. One thing that I don't like is that, so many people speak English. And so, I have a harder time, being able to actually practice my Spanish and, feel as if I'm more immersed in the culture, because, as soon as they see me, as soon as they hear me struggling with Spanish, it's English. And so, that's one thing I don't really like. But for a lot of people who don't necessarily have access to that, or don't really care about, working on their Spanish, that is, a very big convenience to have. That's also where we have tried for the first time some like cafes, chains that started in like the US, like Coffee Bean and Tea Leaf, or Tea Leaf and Coffee Bean. Don't know what the order is, but yeah, we love going there. And it turns out it's from California. I'm from the East Coast, so I had never had it before. And they have panes de bono, which is a very Panamanian thing that we enjoy. Yeah, and so like there are a lot of conveniences, and I think that's a really important thing to know. And it's really one thing that I enjoy when we stay there. I have a less of kind of a romanticized impression of it than my wife. One thing that for me, it seems like there are a lot of people that aren't necessarily happy with what they have in life, or what they're doing for work. For example, a trip to the supermarket is kind of a mixed bag. For one, they have a lot of things that I'm used to in the US and that I love in the US. Like, I'm a big fan of root beer. Root beer is not nearly as popular as like Coca-Cola or Pepsi or anything, and so it's only like specialty stores all around the world that you might be able to find some root beer. But in the local supermarket and where we were staying in Panama City, like, get every single day. Get even the sugar-free options are normally harder to find, and you can find that all the time in their supermarket. But once you bring all your stuff to check out, you can see that the people aren't very happy with whatever. It's just kind of like an atmosphere. I don't know if it's related to their exposure to all of these people who are like retirees who have all of this money to spend, and so they're working this job they don't enjoy, and they see people coming up with like $60-$70 worth of junk food or something, and they're like, this sucks. I don't know. That's my impression of just what they seem, how they interact with us. But there's a lot of stuff available, and that's really nice. There's easy access to like the ocean. Can't necessarily swim in the parts that we've gone to, but having it there is really nice. I'm not a huge fan of the sand, so for me it's more or less the same. There's a lot of interesting nature just right around. Like you walk along the coast, and every single time we've walked along the coast and that one part of it, like we see raccoons. And the raccoons are really interesting. They're very, they look different from the ones that I'm used to seeing in Virginia, and that's kind of fun. But, there's a lot of history. There's a lot of, interesting stuff right in a small area. And I think that's one of the really cool parts of Panama City, is that, because it has so much exposure to the rest of the world. Like, there are a good number of immigrants, like from China. Some of the local convenience stores are run by some Chinese people, or there are some like Chinese restaurants nearby, and that's nice to have kind of exposure to different cultures. We spent a lot of time in China, and we have a lot of, some things we miss, some things we don't, but the food is something that we do miss. So that was nice to have. Some of the food in Panama is also good. Like patacones is like made from bananas. It doesn't sound very appetizing if you've never had it before, but it's good. We're big fans of it. Yeah, and not too far away, you can also get tours to some local villages. There was like a replica village, which is what Xenia was talking about, by the Ancon Hill, but there are also tours to some actual villages that will show you some of their customs and talk about just life as people, native a native culture to Panama, and that's especially interesting. And it's all like, it's a small country. It's an even smaller place where you can find all of this different stuff, and that's pretty nice. Maybe you'll like it a lot. Maybe you'll like it, a good amount. Maybe it's not for you, but we like it.
Well, now we have talked about the pros of living in Panama, especially the animal aspect of things. Now, some things that people complain about are usually associated with the cost of living, specifically in Panama City. Their native currency is pegged to the US dollar, just as it is in Cambodia, El Salvador, and many other countries. So a lot of the times people are complaining that the cost of living in Panama City is way too high. Now, what's your opinion about this, Ksenia?
I think it really depends on what countries you compare it to. It's definitely not cheap. It's not the cheapest country in Latin America, hands down. But I don't think it's the worst in terms of price and quality of life that you can get for that price. Actually, I think that Mexico, for example, is slowly getting more and more expensive, and it also depends on where you live. Because if we compare, for example, per month, what we could afford in Panama, when we were in Panama, both times we stayed at the same hotel. That's not a hotel anymore. It's a co-living space, but it was a hotel. They bought it out and they converted it into this co-working area where you can have your own room, basically live in a hotel room, but also have a kitchen, have a shared pool, have a lot of these really cool things available to you for actually the same price that we would afford in the south of Mexico City without the pool. So in terms of the kind of things that we had access to there, it was very comparable, if not better, than what we could get in Mexico right now. Depends obviously on where you go in Mexico, whereas in Mexico you have to go to maybe smaller places, less touristy places to find that. In Panama, I think that if you wanted to go to one of those like faraway villages, you might not really enjoy the same conveniences, so obviously that's an obvious trade-off. But it's definitely much more expensive than, for example, Paraguay, than Colombia, even though they're neighbors, but Colombia is much cheaper than Panama. And at the same time, I think it's partially the access to the Panama Canal for them that allows them to have a lot of these products, like Josh mentioned, for example, that you can buy root beer, you can buy all sorts of sodas, all sorts of American products for comparably cheap, as opposed to places that have to import them and then tax already those products as foreign products, which we saw, for example, in China. If in China or in those places that have a very specific tax system, they would have like a very big tax on top of basically any foreign product that they import. You don't really feel that much of a change in price when you buy those things in Panama, even though it could be different if you actually import something on your own. So I think that it's more of those just the geographical advantages that Panama has because of the Panama Canal. And I think it really depends on what you want and what your budget is. Because for us, for example, yes, Panama sometimes felt expensive, but I think that it was very much worth it. Whereas in a lot of other places, it's also expensive, but you don't even have a pool for that price.
What's your take? Is Panama expensive or cheap?
Well, if you compare it to the U.S., it's definitely cheap, but it's not that much cheaper. Like Ksenia said, it is one of the more expensive countries that we've been to in Latin America, and I think it kind of feels like an American would feel at home in Panama for a few reasons. One of them being the prices. Things are pretty comparable, and you can also use dollars because the Balboa is like kind of a dollar. Yeah, you only see like things actually as Balboas as coins, but real dollars or American dollars are basically interchangeable with the Balboa. But the prices in the supermarket, prices for food, I feel like they're pretty comparable to what I've seen in the US. And then in terms of accommodations, I think we have had both good luck and we've taken advantage of certain things like buying on a website or reserving for a month at a time that made our accommodations cheaper. But it has been still at the upper end of what we've found. And that was also not what a lot of people who stay in Panama actually take advantage of. So most of the hotels that you see are the really big skyscrapers right next to the beach. It's kind of weird because there's just a very, we feel a very big difference between our spending power and how much money the people who live in all of those places can spend and the different things available. Yeah. Anyway, it's been at the upper range of what we've had to spend on just cost of living in Latin America. As Ksenia said, Mexico is also getting a little bit more expensive. I think the last few times have also been kind of bad luck because it's been, right around certain events, like certain celebrities coming to Mexico City. And so for that reason, the prices get more competitive and it's harder to find a place for as cheap as, we're used to. So it's possible, if we go back without any of that going on, that it might be different in Mexico. But Panama has been consistently more expensive, not quite as expensive as the US.
So overall, you would say the biggest pro is the animal life in Panama, right? That's very unique. And then the downside, perhaps, the cost of living being an issue. And I think that has to do with the fact that Panama is not super self-reliant like Paraguay is. Like energy is very expensive in Panama, right? And food is also not the cheapest because a lot of it is imported from overseas, right? From other Latin American countries. It's just not very self-reliant. Like Paraguay, I mean, food, water, electricity are dirt cheap here, right? Because there's an abundance of it. But you're further away from America. Now, I don't know if you have looked into getting residency in Panama. I know you're not resident of Panama, but there have been a lot of changes in the immigration system. Are you familiar with the residency option they had a couple of years ago where you were allowed to deposit just $5,000 into a bank account and you could have obtained permanent residency immediately? The same system existed in Paraguay too, and they decided to close it down because a lot of people got residency through the bank deposit option, and for instance, they never came back, right? So it's like, why are we giving residency to all these people, if they're not spending time here? And so now they changed. You actually have to form a company, get an employment contract for yourself. You're being employed by your own company. You pay your payroll taxes, and then after 2 years, you can get your cedula and you can get permanent residency, right? One of the big reasons why a lot of Americans choose places like Panama and Paraguay is because of gun ownership, right? It's very easy to own firearms legally in Panama and Paraguay, right? So a lot of American clients that come to us, for instance, that's one of the biggest reasons why they choose Paraguay, Panama, probably the two most liberal countries for gun ownership, right? For owning a firearm in whole Latin America. And also, if you want to get residency, you can obviously purchase real estate. That's another popular option. Or you can marry a Panamanian marriage. Right.
Yeah, that's one thing we already will never do. So
what you're never going to do, right? Which is not on the table for everyone, of course. But the easy option is gone, and so now it's the easiest or the second easiest option you can get is incorporating a business and sponsoring yourself, paying your taxes. So now the Panamanian government is much more looking into the details of your stay and how you're participating in the economy and the work sector. Are you contributing? Are you hiring people? Are you starting a corporation? Are you paying your payroll taxes? All of that. But from a tax perspective, certainly more interesting for her because you're an American, so you have to pay taxes on your worldwide income, right?
Paying taxes together with him because we're Virginia resident.
There you go. So, but if you're not an American, right? If you're from any other country, like pretty much you would not have to pay taxes when living in Panama on Panamanian residency. So if you're interested in relocating to Panama, you can book a consultation with me. Go to nomadelite.com, click on book a consultation, and I look forward to talking to you about the best residency options in Panama. Thank you guys for sharing your experience. I appreciate it. Josh, Ksenia, always good having you on the channel and hearing your insights, your firsthand experiences on living in these places. So thank you very much. We see you guys on the next video.